Thank you for listening. This course was created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional podcasts, books, newsletters, and cool merchandise await. Let's get started. Third-party risks have become a central challenge in responsible artificial intelligence, particularly because many organizations now rely on external vendors for critical AI systems. Unlike internal projects where governance can be tightly controlled, vendor-supplied tools often operate as black boxes, with limited visibility into data, models, and processes. This creates vulnerabilities that extend beyond the boundaries of an organization's direct control. Procurement policies therefore become powerful levers for shaping responsibility, establishing expectations before contracts are signed. Governance must expand across the supply chain, not only to safeguard compliance but also to protect fairness, safety, and trust. When organizations fail to extend oversight to vendors, they inherit hidden risks that can surface as bias, privacy violations, or reputational damage. Framing procurement as part of responsible AI highlights that accountability does not end at the organizational firewall. It must travel the entire supply chain. The types of third-party risks in AI are diverse and consequential. Data quality issues can lead to biased or inaccurate outcomes, especially if vendors use poorly curated or opaque datasets. Privacy compliance gaps are another risk, as vendors may mishandle sensitive information, exposing clients to regulatory liability. Bias in vendor models can produce unfair outcomes, harming vulnerable populations and undermining client credibility. Security vulnerabilities, such as exploitable weaknesses in algorithms or infrastructure, pose additional threats. Finally, reputational harm is always a possibility when vendor practices are inconsistent with responsible AI principles. A scandal affecting one provider can quickly tarnish the reputation of its clients. Recognizing these risks helps organizations understand that procurement is not a transactional process but a strategic one, shaping long-term trust and resilience. Designing procurement processes with responsible AI in mind helps prevent risks from materializing. Requests for proposals should explicitly include RAI requirements, ensuring vendors know from the outset that fairness, transparency, and safety are non-negotiable. Standards for disclosure, such as identifying data sources, detailing methodologies, and explaining model limitations, give organizations a baseline for evaluation. Evaluating vendor governance maturity is also crucial, as companies with established internal practices are more likely to deliver responsibly. These steps embed ethics into procurement, transforming it from a cost-driven exercise into a values-driven one. Clear expectations during the procurement stage set the tone for the entire relationship, signaling to vendors that responsibility is just as important as performance or price. Contractual safeguards formalize expectations and create enforceable obligations. Contracts should include accountability clauses that bind vendors to comply with both legal requirements and organizational standards. Incident reporting obligations ensure that clients are informed promptly if issues such as bias, breaches, or system failures arise. Audit rights provide the ability to independently verify compliance, preventing reliance on vendor self-reporting. Clear escalation paths for disputes help ensure that problems can be resolved quickly and fairly. These safeguards protect organizations from being left vulnerable when issues emerge, shifting responsibility from vague promises to concrete obligations. Strong contracts are therefore a cornerstone of third-party risk management, bridging the gap between ethical aspirations and enforceable commitments. Vendor assessments provide another layer of assurance before adoption. Due diligence should involve evaluating bias, robustness, and security metrics of the systems under consideration. This includes verifying whether vendors align with current regulations and industry standards. Documentation of evaluation outcomes creates transparency and a record of accountability, which can be valuable in future audits or disputes. Vendor assessments are not only technical exercises but also opportunities to probe how seriously providers take their own governance responsibilities. Organizations that perform these assessments diligently can identify red flags early, avoiding costly and reputationally damaging relationships. By treating assessments as integral to procurement rather than optional extras, organizations reinforce the expectation that responsibility is a prerequisite for doing business. Ongoing monitoring is vital because vendor risk does not end once a contract is signed. Continuous reviews of vendor performance help ensure that systems continue to meet standards over time. Monitoring actual outcomes in practice can reveal biases or failures that were not apparent in initial testing. Regular reassessments of risk exposure reflect the dynamic nature of AI, where systems evolve and contexts change. Integration of monitoring into broader governance systems ensures that third-party oversight is not a standalone effort, but part of an organization's overall risk management framework. Without ongoing monitoring, even well-negotiated contracts and thorough assessments can fail, as risks emerge and evolve over time. Effective monitoring is therefore the glue that sustains accountability in long-term vendor relationships. Shared responsibility models are a critical concept when managing AI supplied by vendors. Too often, organizations assume that because a system is purchased, the vendor holds full accountability for outcomes. In reality, both parties share obligations. Vendors must design and deliver systems that meet fairness, safety, and compliance standards, while clients must deploy, monitor, and govern those systems responsibly within their environments. Contracts should explicitly document this division of roles, clarifying who is accountable for bias testing, data security, and incident response. Ambiguity in obligations leads to finger-pointing when problems occur, leaving risks unaddressed. Shared responsibility models provide clarity, ensuring that vendors and clients alike recognize their roles in safeguarding responsible AI. This mutual accountability strengthens trust and creates a more resilient governance framework across the supply chain. Transparency demands form another cornerstone of responsible procurement. Organizations should require vendors to disclose the datasets used for training, or at least provide meaningful detail about their provenance and quality controls. Vendors must also be clear about model limitations, communicating where systems may underperform or fail. Tools such as system cards, datasheets for datasets, or model cards can provide standardized documentation, offering both technical insight and accountability. Open communication of risks, including known trade-offs or uncertainties, reinforces credibility and helps clients make informed decisions. By insisting on transparency, organizations not only protect themselves, but also encourage higher industry standards. Vendors who embrace openness differentiate themselves as trustworthy partners, while those who resist may signal deeper governance gaps. Tools for third-party risk management are expanding as demand grows. Vendor risk assessment platforms now provide structured ways to collect and analyze information on governance practices. Standardized questionnaires and audits make it easier to compare providers and ensure consistency in evaluations. Automated dashboards allow organizations to monitor vendor performance in real time, flagging anomalies or compliance gaps. Industry shared assurance frameworks are also emerging, providing collective resources to evaluate vendors and reduce duplicated effort. These tools represent a maturing ecosystem of oversight, helping organizations manage the complexity of multiple vendor relationships. By leveraging such tools, companies can scale their monitoring efforts without sacrificing depth, ensuring that responsibility keeps pace with innovation. Cross-functional collaboration is essential for effective vendor oversight. Procurement teams play a central role in setting requirements and negotiating terms, but they cannot act alone. Legal and compliance teams ensure that contractual obligations align with regulations and organizational standards. Technical experts must verify vendor claims, testing models for fairness, robustness, and security. Risk managers monitor exposures across the supply chain, integrating vendor issues into enterprise-level frameworks. Leadership endorsement ties these efforts together, ensuring that responsible procurement is not an afterthought, but a strategic priority. When all these functions align, vendor oversight becomes holistic and credible. Without such collaboration, gaps emerge, leaving organizations vulnerable to hidden risks in third-party systems. Oversight of vendors is not without challenges. Many providers resist sharing sensitive details, citing intellectual property concerns. Power imbalances can also limit negotiation, especially when organizations depend on dominant vendors with little incentive to compromise. A lack of standardized assurance processes makes it difficult to compare providers or hold them to consistent benchmarks. Rapid innovation adds further complexity, as vendor systems evolve faster than governance frameworks can keep up. These challenges highlight why procurement must be proactive, embedding responsibility into contracts, audits, and monitoring. Waiting until problems arise is costly, both financially and reputationally. Organizations must approach oversight with persistence and creativity, finding ways to push vendors toward transparency while building resilience against uncertainty. The regulatory landscape for third-party AI risk is expanding quickly. Governments are beginning to mandate supply chain accountability, requiring organizations to demonstrate oversight not only of their own systems, but also of those supplied by vendors. Sector-specific rules are particularly prominent in finance, healthcare, and government contracting, where audits and documentation of vendor systems are increasingly required. Anticipated AI-specific acts, such as the European Union AI Act, are expected to formalize obligations for both providers and clients. Global vendor standards are also emerging, encouraging convergence across regions and industries. These developments make it clear that organizations cannot outsource responsibility entirely. Regulatory pressure is making vendor accountability a shared legal obligation, reinforcing the importance of strong procurement practices and diligent oversight. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Ethical considerations remind us that responsibility does not stop at the organizational boundary. When companies purchase or integrate third-party AI systems, they are still accountable for the downstream effects of those tools. If a vendor system produces biased outcomes or compromises data privacy, the harm impacts the client's stakeholders as much as the vendors. Fairness and transparency must therefore be treated as procurement values, not just technical specifications. Organizations have an obligation to prevent harm even when it originates outside their own walls. This requires asking tough questions of vendors and refusing to accept vague assurances. It also requires respect for stakeholders, from customers to employees, who may be affected by third-party systems. Ethical procurement acknowledges that responsibility travels along the supply chain, reinforcing the principle that accountability cannot be outsourced. Documentation practices provide a structured way to maintain oversight and demonstrate accountability. Organizations should keep clear records of vendor evaluations, including results of fairness audits, security checks, and compliance assessments. Tracking whether vendors meet contractual obligations allows clients to intervene before small lapses escalate into systemic failures. Audit evidence should be stored systematically, ready to be presented to regulators, auditors, or stakeholders who demand proof of due diligence. Transparent reporting of outcomes, both internally and externally, strengthens trust and ensures issues are not hidden. By building a disciplined documentation process, organizations transform oversight from a one-time check into a continuous, verifiable record of responsible procurement. Documentation also serves as an organizational memory, helping future procurement teams learn from past experiences. Metrics for vendor performance translate ethical commitments into measurable expectations. Fairness indicators track whether outcomes differ across demographic groups, ensuring vendors deliver equitable systems. Monitoring incident frequency and resolution time provides insight into how vendors respond to problems, highlighting resilience and accountability. Compliance metrics assess whether contractual requirements, such as reporting obligations or audit participation, are being met consistently. Stakeholder satisfaction, including feedback from employees or customers who interact with the systems, adds another dimension of performance evaluation. These metrics provide a balanced view that extends beyond technical accuracy, capturing the broader impacts of third-party AI. By monitoring vendors against clear benchmarks, organizations create a framework for continuous improvement while signaling that responsibility is as important as functionality. Scalability of oversight is a practical necessity for organizations that work with multiple vendors. Managing risk across dozens or even hundreds of suppliers requires efficiency without losing rigor. Tiered approaches allow higher-risk vendors, such as those handling sensitive data or high-stakes applications, to receive deeper scrutiny, while lower-risk providers undergo lighter reviews. Flexible templates streamline evaluations, reducing the burden on procurement teams while maintaining consistency. Automation can further support scalability, with dashboards tracking vendor performance and flagging issues in real time. Centralizing governance processes across vendors helps avoid fragmentation and duplication. These strategies make oversight feasible at scale, ensuring that responsibility does not erode as the number of third-party relationships grows. Scalability is thus about maintaining integrity while adapting to organizational complexity. Future directions in third-party risk management suggest growing maturity in procurement practices. Vendor certification schemes are expanding, offering standardized ways for providers to demonstrate compliance with fairness, transparency, and security standards. Shared assurance databases, where organizations pool audit results or risk assessments, reduce duplication and increase efficiency across industries. International procurement standards are converging, making it easier to align oversight across borders. Automated oversight tools are also becoming more sophisticated, enabling continuous monitoring of vendor systems without relying solely on manual processes. These trends point toward a future where responsible procurement is normalized, supported by shared infrastructure and clearer expectations. Organizations that prepare now will be better positioned to adapt as certification, standards, and automation become central to vendor management. Organizational responsibilities ensure that procurement practices align with broader responsible AI commitments. Integrating RAI principles directly into procurement policies formalizes expectations, embedding responsibility into every contract and vendor relationship. Staff must be trained in vendor risk management, equipping them to ask the right questions and evaluate claims critically. Providing resources, whether budget, platforms, or personnel, supports the ongoing work of oversight. Aligning vendor practices with organizational goals ensures consistency, preventing external partnerships from undermining internal values. These responsibilities demonstrate that third-party risk is not a separate issue, but part of the larger ecosystem of governance. By taking ownership of vendor accountability, organizations protect both their stakeholders and their reputation, building resilience across the supply chain. Practical takeaways highlight how procurement can serve as a linchpin for responsible AI. First, procurement is not simply about cost and capability. It is about embedding responsibility into the supply chain. Contracts and monitoring mechanisms play a vital role in mitigating risks, turning values into enforceable obligations. Cross-functional teams involving legal, procurement, compliance, and technical staff strengthen oversight by ensuring no single perspective dominates. Transparency and accountability are essential, both in vendor relationships and in communication with stakeholders who rely on these systems. These takeaways show that procurement is not a back-office process, but a frontline defense in responsible AI, extending ethical practices beyond the organization itself. The forward outlook suggests stronger regulatory mandates for vendor accountability. Governments are moving toward requiring organizations to prove that their third-party systems meet fairness, transparency, and security standards. Global alignment of procurement standards is likely, reducing fragmentation across regions and industries. Automation will play an increasing role in oversight, with continuous monitoring tools reducing the burden on human teams. Shared responsibility frameworks between clients and vendors will also mature, clarifying obligations and preventing accountability gaps. The trajectory points to a world where responsible procurement is not just good practice but a legal and competitive necessity, shaping how organizations engage with their entire AI ecosystem. The key points of this episode emphasize the breadth and depth of third-party risk in AI. Risks span fairness, privacy, security, and reputation, all of which can undermine trust if left unchecked. Contracts, monitoring, and oversight tools provide mechanisms for mitigation, transforming abstract concerns into practical controls. Governance ensures accountability across the supply chain, making responsibility a shared obligation rather than an optional commitment. Regulatory pressure is accelerating these changes, pushing organizations to strengthen procurement policies and oversight practices. These key points together frame procurement as a strategic lever for embedding responsible AI across organizational boundaries. Scalable practices help organizations manage the complexity of multiple vendors without losing sight of accountability. Tiered risk management ensures that high-risk providers receive closer scrutiny while low-risk ones are handled more efficiently. Standardized templates streamline evaluations, promoting consistency and saving resources. Shared resources, such as industry-wide assurance databases, reduce duplication and strengthen collective oversight. Automation adds sustainability, enabling continuous monitoring at scale. These scalable practices make it possible to govern dozens or even hundreds of vendors responsibly, ensuring that the integrity of responsible AI is maintained as operations expand globally. In conclusion, procurement and third-party risk management are essential extensions of responsible AI governance. Contracts, monitoring, and scalable practices ensure that vendors align with organizational standards for fairness, transparency, and safety. Organizational responsibilities and regulatory mandates reinforce the message that accountability cannot be outsourced. It must be shared across the supply chain. By approaching procurement as a strategic tool, organizations protect themselves, their stakeholders, and their reputations. Looking ahead, external audits and assurance frameworks will become increasingly important, offering independent validation of vendor practices and further strengthening trust in AI ecosystems. Thanks for tuning in to Bare Metal Cyber, your trusted source for cybersecurity educational materials, news, and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.